I'm going to move quite quickly on to introducing our next speaker now. So as John said, we're now going to hear from Dr. Anne Ryan. She believes that society's civic capacity affects how ideas are taken up, how movements and ideas are sustained, and how a body of knowledge can grow concerning just and ecological ways to live. She's a founder member of Derrybeg Community Supported Farm, former coordinator of the National Network Basic Income Ireland, and an active member of FASTA, the Foundation for the Economics of Sustainability. She's published on the philosophy and practice of enough, on commons and commoning, basic income, feminism, discourse, and reflective practice. And it's an absolute delight to welcome her here today. Thank you so much, Anne.
Hello, everyone. Once again, Balo Year of Ermagin. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a special pleasure to follow on from John, because I'm a great admirer of his work, and I'm very happy to be in the presence of so many other great speakers. I'm looking forward to the whole weekend with you. So my task is to talk about the philosophy and in practice of enough, which I think you're probably all very familiar with. As I started by saying the Irish word ball means a sufficiency, and it's often used in a greeting or in a response when somebody is praised. The word baloíoraibh or baloíora is used to say, well, hopefully they won't exceed the threshold, the sort of threshold that John was talking about. So I'm really going to talk to you today about enough as a kind of philosophy and practice that can bring us into a state of caring sufficiency instead of extractive excess and misery on one hand. Enough is also very personal and very political, and I hope that'll come through in what I'm going to say. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what it entails to start. Then I'm going to talk about some very practical political frameworks that are based on enough, which could be put into practice to help us all live a life of enough. And then what we can do as citizen leaders when, say, our elected leaders don't actually do what we want them to do and put enough into practice, what we can do in civil society as elected leaders, as non-elected leaders, as citizen leaders. So just to go back to the basics, go leor is the Irish phrase for enough, and it means enough and plenty, as most of you will know. It's in English, in modern English, the term tends to be associated a bit with mediocrity. Oh, sure, it'll do. You know, it's not really great, and it's not efficient enough. John mentioned the drive for efficiency that we're all subjected to. But actually, most Indigenous traditions have some kind of sense of enough and the richness associated with it. And the American sociologist Juliet Shaw coined the term plenitude, which is a nice one in English, to mean the richness of enough. And of course, English does have a sense of plenty when we think of phrases like enough is as good as a feast or waste not, want not. For me too, there's something, I'll come back to this at the end, the sense of enough is something about coming home to ourselves, finding that sweet spot. And if I just go on now, why isn't my next slide coming up? Oh, there we go. Yeah, enough for me interweaves. Now there's many other dimensions to enough, but these are the ones I've chosen to emphasize today. Enough interweaves these four elements of ecology, ethics, aesthetics, and economics, specifically ecological economics. So, and the word eco, which some of you will also know, is derived from the Greek oikos, which means our home, the home planet that we live in. Ecology is kind of the study of the home planet and the systems and the connections and the interdependences and the polycultures that are inherent in that, and especially in healthy systems. And also about the value of the ordinary. We're constantly being exhorted to be extraordinary and to excel and to push ourselves beyond limits. But in a healthy ecological system, the ordinary actually is really important. Every tiny, apparently unimportant, ugly little insect or grub has its role to play. Again, this is reflecting something John said. Ethics is at the heart of enough. It's really a moral compass that should direct all of economics and should direct all of life. It's about equality and sharing, sufficiency for everybody, ethical thrift, even you might, dare I say it, ethical austerity, which has got a really bad name in recent years, but that's a kind of a punitive austerity that's been visited on us. But really an ethical waste not, want not, thrift and austerity is at the heart of enough as well. And it's essentially politics. So much, I think politics is ethics in action, really. Or sometimes one might say a lack of ethics in action. Enough is also about aesthetics. It's about the actual beauty of finding that sweet spot. It's like, I suppose you might say, Baby Bear's porridge, which was just right for Goldilocks. It was neither too hot, neither too cold, but just finding the sweet spot. And John mentioned also the question of, we don't need to shrink everything. We don't need to stop all of growth. So aesthetics is about finding what needs to shrink and what needs to grow in society and economy. And if you think about in music or art, there's the aesthetics of that. There always have to be limits. There have to be gaps between the notes in music, otherwise it's meaningless. There have to be a picture has to have a frame around it to make some kind of boundary to it. So that's all part of the aesthetics of enough. And then there's a whole branch of economics that's called ecological economics, which is all about the kind of work that John was talking about a sane, humane, ecological economics, capacity of the earth and serving people rather than the values of a few, the accumulation for a few. When we ignore enough, the ecological ceiling and the social foundation get breached and safety is compromised. And this is a big theme in the work of Kate Raworth. Some of you will have heard of donut economics, where we have to, the donut is about the ecological ceiling and the social foundation. But we're breaching these all the time at the moment through the kind of indiscriminate pursuit of growth. And the shocks are happening already. We don't know how they're going to play out over time. These are both biophysical shocks and shocks in society, socioeconomic shocks. But we actually can't predict how they're going to play out over time. Why does it happen? The global food system actually, I wonder, have I skipped a slide? No. So I want to just home in for a moment on the global food system as an exemplar of where we have breached limits. In the rich countries in particular, the global food system, and this again is back to the rich countries that John has been talking about, we concentrate on capital-intensive, mechanized food systems. We about 4 companies control the entire number of crops in the world, and these type of crops are capital-intensive, low-labor, mechanizable commodity crops like wheat, maize, beef, dairy, and rice, and all the seeds and all the chemicals that are associated with them. So what has happened there is in the rich countries, we have minimized the numbers of people working in farming, and we have outsourced the labor-intensive kind of farming to the poorer countries where labor is cheaper and regulations might be less stringent. So within our global food system, there's lots of people toiling away, invisible, in bad conditions, far away from us. But because this system is so interconnected, because there are so few players in it, it is really vulnerable to the kind of shocks we've been talking about. And it's losing its resilience. And the war in Ukraine has actually exposed this. The war in Ukraine isn't causing problems with food, but it has exposed the problems with us bringing in loads of wheat, say, to feed pigs in this country, which we then export to China, or bringing in tons of fertilizer from Russia. And these are all really fossil, high fossil usage activities. People often don't realize how fossil intensive fertilizers are, but to make nitrogen, you use loads of natural gas. It's done at very high temperatures to make nitrogen fertilizers. And that's a real problem. The nitrogen then in itself is a problem on the land because of the runoff that it causes, polluting our waterways. It actually destroys the resilience and the ecology of the soil. We have a huge problem with soil ecology at the moment. And not only that, but this kind of farming and agriculture system, it divorces people in their local areas from their food system, which is a major problem. It de-skills people in the kind of horticulture that is needed to feed people well. And on top of that, it destroys agricultural systems in poorer countries. For example, Ireland is exporting a lot of milk to West African countries, which is destroying the livelihoods of local farmers there. So I've gone on a little bit about the food system, but I want to really point out to it as an example of where we have breached the limits, where we are certainly not observing enough. And it's really important because it's both personal and political. Everybody eats. Nobody can survive without eating. So it's bringing together again the personal and the political. We really need to get somewhere towards an intelligent agriculture. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I've gone over a little bit on the last one, but we need to be getting towards a job-rich, fossil-free agriculture in every country, and mostly horticulture. We need to be aiming for about 20% of the population involved in growing food, sort of adequate output of food without using fossil fuels. And John mentioned work-rich situations. This can be really rewarding work in farming if we could get more people into it. Lots of young people in Ireland really want to get into farming and horticulture, but they find it really difficult. And then on the other hand, you have many farmers in real trouble with debt, and they're sucked into that kind of that global system that I was talking about in order to expand their output with the problem of getting out of debt. So to get there, we need to try and ease the pressures to expand for everybody. We all have the capacity for enough that I talked about earlier in the more philosophical part of the discussion. But it's breached all the time because all of us are caught up in this global system, no matter how critical we are. And why? Why does enough get ignored? Well, for a start, we've had a lot of cheap fossil fuels for quite a long time. Money moves very easily around the world. So the kind of agriculture, for example, that I've been talking about is only possible because of that and because of the fossil fuels. Importantly, too, most money is lent into existence with interest by private institutions. So economies have to keep expanding, and this refers to what John talked about, but it's like a bicycle has to keep moving in order to keep upright. We have to keep expanding to meet the interest. So something has to be done about the money. Speculation on land values causes high land and high house prices, which again is a pressure on people to keep earning. And people have to constantly increase their productivity, very often in useless jobs or in harmful jobs, regardless of the social or ecological cost. And the German ecological economist Margaret Kennedy, who died not so long ago, calculated that 40%, this was in the 1990s, 40% of the jobs in Germany existed simply to service debt. So people keep getting drawn into this, whether they have a real sense of enough or not, they get drawn into it. And these are political decisions. To allow this to happen is political. It affects us hugely in our personal lives. So what could we do to ease the pressures on people, to allow them to live lives of enough? Number one, and these things are what might be. So we have elements of them in some cases. We don't have enough of them. We need a social wage, which is a big category that includes a basic income, really good free public services, free at the point of use, housing, transport, and going beyond that to to luxuries, swimming pools, parks, museums, drama clubs, book clubs, everything provided free or really affordable prices to people, so that the pressures to keep earning and to be productive are lessened, and people go beyond the survival or the firefighting mode, so that they can begin to really understand the value of enough. That's a big thing. The social wage is an old concept, but it really needs to be brought back in. And of course, it's very relevant, even more relevant now with as Colette mentioned, with the rising in the cost of living and so on. If the social wage is increased, everybody benefits, whether they're in a job earning or not. We also need commons-based taxes, starting with a site value tax to prevent speculation on property values and to stop the accumulation of wealth among older and more wealthy people. A site value tax is a tax on the value of land, the value of the location, which the owner actually does nothing to create. The community and the spending of the investment by the state are what create the value of the location or of the site, and that should be returned to the community, the state representing the community at large. We also need to attend to debt. And of course, that to reconstructing debt, or in some cases to debt jubilees, which would come with conditions, with environmental and biodiversity conditions attached. That's what we could achieve, very doable. I'll just go back to that. We could achieve those very doable at the moment. And in fact, there's, some of them are already in place. There's are almost in place, and there are strong public drives for them. But in the bigger thinking really big, what might also be harder to achieve things upstream in the economy are also really necessary. We need to cap fossil fuels, a hard and declining cap on fossil fuels year by year within the safe scientific limits, so that if, within a decade or so, there would be no fossil fuels coming into our economies. And we need to share the way that would work is that the big fossil fuel companies would have to buy licenses to bring fossil fuels into the economy, and the money from those licenses would be divided as a dividend among everybody globally. There's a start. It's a big.
To rush you on, but I'm
sorry, Colette. This is big thinking, and it has started with the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance. So I'm going to run on. There need to be caps on other things as well, and public money systems. How likely are we to see such measures? Well, some of them, as I said, yes. Others, not so much. They're a bit more in the future. So as we, as citizen leaders, stand in this gap between what is and what might be, what can we do in civil society? I think we have to constantly remind ourselves about enough, in the sense that we attend to these four things of coping, critiquing, resisting, and creating. We have to really understand enough in our own lives and in the lives of others, appropriate load, speed, rhythm, just not expecting too much of ourselves and of other people, being kind to each other. And as we get more and more close to more breakdowns, this is going to become even more important, helping people who are really abused and badly off in the present system. Critique, really what I've been doing, I suppose, and what John has been doing is critique. Close attention with our whole selves, not just with our rational selves, to what is going on. Resisting, refusing the dominant stories like the young people are doing, striking, the school strikes, but just acting with other people. It's very easy to get into despair when we think too closely about what's going on. Yet we need to look it in the face. So we need to have a sufficient level of coping in our personal lives and a sufficient level of working with other people to create new things, communities of sufficiency and care, political activism, just building the culture of enough and helping each other to live better lives is really important. We are, all of you out there, you wouldn't be here if you didn't want to be citizen leaders. You need to attend to all of these things while keeping the bigger picture in mind as well. And I'm just going to draw your attention to this wonderful book by Ursula Le Guin, Always Coming Home, written in the 1990s, about a post-breakdown society where very many of the things I'm talking about are in place, and there is a very healthy society. I'm sorry I went over time a little bit there. I was fussing around with my slides at the beginning, so I hope you'll forgive me. And I think some of what I've taken up has reflected what John has said, and I'm looking forward to talking to him. So Colette, my apologies again for going over time.
No bother at all.
And there are some resources there at the end, because I know the slides will be made.
That's right. All of the slides and the presentations will be made available.